36 weeks pregnant.
Oh boy. Here we go. The protest will begin. We've already had enough protesting in Tulsa the last few days.
Oh my God. I mean, LA's been a mess. Still, every day.
Okay.
Which is great. But
so we're going to let people kind of filter in here for just a second. I see everybody joining, so we will do that for a moment and make sure. So we're streaming live. Okay. Hey, everybody. We are so thrilled to have you here on a Wednesday event. We've been doing a lot of Mondays and Thursdays for the last, 16 years or however long this pandemic's been going for. But we've been doing these events for a long time and have kind of gotten into a bit of a schedule here. And we were going to be talking with Stephanie a few weeks back, but some scheduling conflicts occurred, and we were glad to be able to reschedule this event. So I want to tell you about a couple of things coming up, though. If you will go to our website, you can see our full schedule of virtual events. We have things all the way, I think we're booking into September now. And we have a pretty robust schedule. Next week, we have Laura Prescott on the 1st. Laura wrote The Secrets We Kept, which was a fantastic book kind of about Russia and spies and Dr. Zhivago and all these wonderful things. We have Emma Straub on the 2nd. So Emma, of course, wonderful novelist, but also a fellow bookseller, owner of Books Are Magic. So kind of our magic bookstore connection there, Magic City and Books Are Magic. We're connected by that. And then tomorrow, Thursday night, we'll be talking with Britt Bennett for her wonderful novel, The Vanishing Half. So that is going to be tomorrow. Lots of fun stuff. And then one thing, all the events are free and open to the public. We have occasionally done a charged event. We are going to be doing one of those on July 6th with Colson Whitehead. And one of the reasons we're doing that is because we're giving half the proceeds to that event to the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation here in Tulsa, which does a lot of great work on race relations and reconciliation in general. So that's going to be July 6th. So go to the website, magiccitybooks.com, and you can see all the stuff coming up. I have been looking forward to this chat for a while, and I was trying to think back. We had Stephanie come to Tulsa, gosh, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago now. It's been a while.
June of 2017.
Only 3 years ago. Oh my gosh, time's crazy. So we had Stephanie here for a really fun, a couple of days. We did a dinner. We kind of toured around the city. We had all kinds of fun. And that was right before Sweet Bitter, the TV show, came out, because I think, and we'll talk about this in a minute, you were carrying around this giant Bible for the TV show, which had not kind of been released to the world yet. But I had no idea at the time that the next book we would be talking about would be a memoir. I was thinking it definitely would be a novel. So I was thrilled when I got my hands on Stray. And, it's hard to say that it was, it's certainly not, it was not enjoyable, but it was powerful, right? Because it has some dark moments. It's a hard-hitting book. It's kind of a gut punch in a certain kind of way, but it's totally unforgettable. And if you have ever had any kind of dysfunction in your family or any kind of tough times, you're going to find something in this book to relate to. And I found myself kind of reliving parts of my life through this book, and the style of it is something that's just kind of unlike other memoirs that I've ever read before. So we're going to talk about Stray. We're going to talk about babies and Sweet Bitter and TV and pandemics and everything else. So let's give a warm welcome to Stephanie Danler. We're so happy to have you.
Oh, Jeff, I'm so happy to see you, except that I was really excited to go back to Tulsa and see you in person.
Yeah, this was going to be an in-person event. I should have said that. And of course, the world turned upside down. So, but thank goodness we have technology at our grasp to still talk, or we'd be having to do this via 2 tin cans and a string, which was not as fun. So congratulations on the book. It's like I was saying, I've kind of been grappling with like how to compliment you on this book, because it is kind of a tough book in the sense of like what it's about and what it deals with. And it touches on things that I would imagine are difficult to talk about or to write about. And so I guess I'd like to begin by kind of laying out the kind of trifecta of sections that the book is really about. So the book is separated into three sections: mother, father, and monster, right? So those are kind of the three sections of the book. Do you kind of want to lay out for people that maybe haven't had a chance to read it what the kind of general conceit of the memoir is?
Yeah, of course. And I'm glad that you are having trouble complimenting me because
You deserve a compliment. It's just I can't find the words. You
it's
can't
just
find the words.
it's dark. It's a
Yeah.
dark book. And I think that writing it was such an intense experience and so different from Sweet Bitter. And I can only imagine that that comes across in the finished product, where there's a lot of fun in Sweet Bitter. There really isn't a ton of fun in this book. But it is about the inheritance of damage. My parents are addicts. My mom is a lifelong alcoholic who is now disabled from a brain aneurysm. And my father, unbeknownst to all of us, was a crystal meth addict, and his life unraveled. And even before that, they were pretty mediocre parents. The book is about moving back home to California and kind of reckoning with the ways that I am like them, and that the damage that I have managed to keep alive, and ways that I'm not like them, ways that I might be able to transcend that legacy. And so the first section is about being back in California and visiting my handicapped mother and remembering her in ways that I hadn't in years. The middle section is about reckoning with my father and how similar we've become, and also why I had to cut him out of my life completely. And then during that time that I moved back to California, I was having an affair with a married man who I very much believed would be the big love of my life. And it was a incredibly self-destructive, hurtful cycle that the two of us were in. And I call him the monster. And the third section is reckoning with that relationship and seeing really if the character, who is me, can turn a corner and imagine something better for herself.
The book does something, New York plays such a big role, of course, in this book. And California is such a huge character in this book. And the way you write about California, and that's where I think the kind of tough subject, right, gets palatable because of the way you're able to write the book, like the style and the enjoyment of the way you wrote, and the kind of prose generally takes a little bit of the edge off of some of the darker content, meaning like I loved kind of how you set up things, the way you write about California. It very much feels like you intended to kind of make that place a character in the book. Was that something that I'm just reading into it, or was that purposeful?
It was definitely purposeful. I didn't have a book until I had California. I had started writing about my father when I moved back here, and it felt kind of almost unconscious. And I wrote a piece for Vogue that came out in early 2015. And that was the first time I had ever broken the silence about my parents being addicts. And even then, I was still told Knopf I was working on a novel, still was researching a novel. And it wasn't until I pitched an essay to the Sewanee Review that was about the environmental damage, the sort of original sin at the heart of the building of Los Angeles, which I believe is the Owens Lake, which was a lake that we drained to build the city and has caused the #1 site of dust pollution in the United States. It's an actual disaster. So I pitched an essay on that, and I thought it would be about sites of trauma. And when that essay took a turn towards my family, I had the central metaphor of the book, which is what it's like to be from California, a land of beauty, a veneer of glamour, but a hollow, corrupt, and very volatile place, which felt a lot like my childhood.
There's also kind of a feeling that, if you hadn't told me the book was set now, and obviously you go back and forth between when you're, but the contemporary section of the book, it could very much be a book written in like the 1970s. I mean, you're living in Laurel Canyon. You're kind of, it feels very much, play it as it lays kind of meets like all, that milieu of like the Didion, Eve Babbitt's kind of world that inhabited that 1970s time. Obviously it's not then, it's now, but there's something aesthetically there that you kind of captured. I wonder, when you're thinking kind of about the tone of the book, right? The overall kind of feel, is that something that happens while it's happening? Because like you said, you kind of had this general metaphor at the starting point, but that's not necessarily the tone and feel of the book. Does that kind of just reveal itself as you get going? Or is that an editing process thing?
No, I think it's instinctive. I think it's there. I think what I borrow from Didion and Babbitt's, or what I hope to borrow from them, is this belief that the psychological landscape really dominates the physical landscape, that something like Laurel Canyon can be incredibly bohemian and beautiful and desired in the daylight, and at nighttime there are landslides and coyotes and murderers in the hills.
Yeah.
And I think that that sense of the slipperiness of what a place means, what a place looks like, both of those writers write that way about Los Angeles. And so I also grew up reading them, so I'm sure that it has just informed me my entire life. But there's a way in which that house in Laurel Canyon was a dream, a culmination of a dream, and it was also falling off the hillside and a total shithole. And I spent some of the darkest days of my life in that space, and that is very Los Angeles to me.
Yeah, I can't remember where in the book you were talking about the idea that the roads are too narrow to get fire trucks. Like if there's a fire
trucks cannot get up into Laurel Canyon. The streets are too small. They learned that during a fire in the 1960s, that it's completely indefendable from fire, and fire recurs in the Santa Monica Mountains every single year. And we keep building into the Santa Monica Mountains, into these places. I mean, houses fall down in Laurel Canyon every single year. Erosion only goes one direction, and that's the wrong way for real estate development. It doesn't grow back. But there's this sort of like hedonistic amnesia that people have here, this sense that you can ignore it, that the beauty, that you can focus on the climate and the sunshine and the beauty and not see the long-term consequences.
Well, that's exactly kind of the point I was getting to, is that, kind of this metaphor within the metaphor, right? Which is, some people might read this book and say, yeah, you can't pick your parents, right? And that's something that we all have to deal with. And a lot of the book is like, you basically raised yourself. And in some ways I did that myself. I think that's not the rarest thing in the world. I had two older brothers who had some, a lot of behavioral issues. So I'm the youngest kid. So it was like, there was other stuff to do. When I was a kid, I thought my parents didn't pay attention as much, but then you grow up and you start to think they were living a life and kind of doing things to survive and make it through. And you kind of learn more as you get older. But the argument could then be made, and I think you deal with this some in that last section, which is, why do I keep repeating the same behavior patterns? Why we keep having fires in Laurel Canyon, but we keep building the houses back up? Why do I keep putting myself in the same situation over and over and over again? And I do think there's some parallels, between those two things.
Absolutely. There's a lack of long-term vision, right? Where is my sense of self-preservation and long-term investment? And I think when you grow up with really unstable parents who can't teach you I mean, my parents can't even teach me what it looks like to live into their 50s because that's when their lives imploded, but they can't teach you how to hold on to partners and friends and family. And so there's a lack of imagination there. And where you take refuge is short-term pleasure. Sweetbitter is all about the immediate, the present, and not dwelling on the past and not trying to think too far into the future.
I think a lot of people might read this book and think about it and maybe think that your parents might be dead because of the way you write about them in this book, because I think a lot of people would never have the courage or whatever the word is to kind of be that upfront about it. And not just because you're worried about them maybe necessarily reading it, but everybody in your orbit that knows them and the kind of larger constellation of people, extended friends, family, whatever. What kind of warnings, advanced knowledge, whatever, did your kind of larger environment of people in your life know about this book before it came out? Was there any awareness really that you were going to be diving deep into these really personal places?
My friends who feature in the book all knew. My sister was very involved from the beginning. She's a big character in the book, and our relationship is one reason that I am functioning at all, high functioning maybe. I don't have relationships with my parents, so I'm not faced with the same accountability that a lot of people who are trying to write memoirs are. I don't see them for holidays, and I haven't for decades, really. And my mom can't read. I mean, there are all these circumstances that have left me very free. I did use, when the one that was hardest was the married man who is still married and who I don't have a relationship or friendship with. And that I gave him warning, but I'm sure he did not believe me. 100% did not believe me until I sent a draft. And I took great pains to protect his privacy and had no intention of disrupting his life. But that was the one that had the most consequence, insofar as I was accountable to someone who I had no intention of hurting or being vindictive, but I also needed to tell the truth of my story. And that was the hardest story for me to tell.
I was thinking about, you're not too far off from my age, so we're kind of in the same general age range. And I was thinking about, I'm so glad that I grew up without social media in my life, and without that microscope that would be on me and anybody else. You had a very wild childhood and a wild adolescence. Do you think you could have survived it kind of with the way kids live today? I mean, I just think it amplifies so many of the problems that we have, and not just like self-image problems with, all these different things. Now, on the flip side of it, it seems like there were moments where you felt very alone as a young person, and you might have had more outreach and connection with people and felt like you lived in a world that was a little bit bigger, So I think you could argue that there's benefits to it, but
Yeah, I'm gonna say no, actually, to that. I always worked since I was 15 years old. I've worked in restaurants. I've had coworkers. I've had books. I've had teachers, and I definitely have spent a lot of time feeling lonely. But it's also been pivotal for my development of a sense of self. That's what I think would be missing if I grew up today with social media and this sort of schism that we have between our whole selves in the real world and our virtual selves that we're always curating and presenting and controlling, and the sort of ambient intimacy that we're living in with people, like we're doing it right now. But also, my Instagram, I'm engaged with people constantly. It goes on 24 hours a day. How do you develop a relationship with aloneness, with solitude?
Yeah. With
isolation. Like
yourself.
how do you become a writer?
Yeah.
I the environment and social media when I have like I have children, I have a son and I'm pregnant with a daughter, and those are the two things.
Yeah.
I'm like gun violence, like the world's crazy, but what the fuck with the environment and what the fuck with social media? Like, how am I going to parent through these things?
Yeah. I was growing up in the 1990s, especially, it was such a weird moment. And now, I'm starting to I turned 40 next month. So I've been kind of a little bit, waxing nostalgic. And I think also just this pandemic has pushed everybody into a place of feeling like this is a little bit more like what the world used to kind of feel like, because we were bored more in a good way. And I think we've been forced. I was reading an article, I can't remember who wrote it, but it said like, your kids are going to have a 1980s summer or something, like that was the name of it. It's like, this summer is going to be different than any summer they've ever had before, just because of some of the restrictions and the fact that they have to kind of be together more and all these things. And I think that's trying to shine it a little bit more, better than it actually is. But I do think that boredom and loneliness and maybe not loneliness, but being alone. I think there's obviously a difference between being alone and being lonely. Does help someone, especially like you as a young writer, figure out how to think about the world. And I guess my question is, before I'm rambling too much, is now that you have a little kid, you have a house with people in it. Are you able to find that? Because you seem to live such a nomadic life, and you were able to kind of find those spaces, whether it was on an airplane and now you're not traveling, whatever, and you traveled a lot, before this. Are you able to find that place now?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's actually a question that someone would ask who really, really, really knows me, which I appreciate, because we had a great time in Tulsa, but
Yeah.
that is very insightful. No, so I had to leave to write this book. My husband stopped working. He took over care for my 5-month-old son. We sublet our house. We moved to Europe. And all of that sounds like a vacation, and it wasn't. I worked weekends. I could have been in Tulsa instead of Spain, but what it did was give me that feeling I used to have of anonymity and dislocation, and being multiple time zones away from commitments and conversations and what was happening within my world. And it let me write the first draft of this book after collecting material for many, many years in 9 weeks, just from beginning to end, did nothing but worked. I've always needed planes. I've always needed a feeling of being able to disappear from my life. And so these months at home have been quiet, and it's incredible. And there's been a lot of peace, but it hasn't been productive for my writing at all. It actually sends me spinning. And I think that has something to do with the way that I was raised, and that chaos is my default. Right. And so I don't know how that changes, or if it changes over time. I know that I won't be able to leave for every book that I want to write. Like, I'm going to have to find some way to integrate writing into being a mother, into being my day job is writing TV shows, right. Into being a friend, into being a citizen. Because right now it's a completely separate self.
Do you still feel the urge to just go?
Of course. In the middle of the night, I'm looking at residencies that let your family come along. My husband's like, how am I ever going to have a career? And I'm like, I don't know. Because I'm like applying for stuff that would take us to Berlin. And I can't stop.
I want to incorporate a couple of questions here from our viewers. Anna, who's one of our viewers here, says, you mentioned in another chat that you want writing to be your art. Therefore, you keep a day job and writing as a hobby. why, and how do you need to separate the two? And what is your regular job then? Is that the TV work that you're doing? Yeah.
Yeah, I work in television. And so I wrote Sweet Bitter while I was waiting tables. And I wrote Stray while I was producing and writing Sweet Bitter, the television show on Stars. I have a show and a script right here that I'm working on for HBO Max. Not everything is like a very splashy from my life. I've been taking calls about adapting Stray potentially, but one of the reasons I decided to do the TV show was that I had very smart people offering me a PhD in screenwriting, and it was a skill set that could potentially support us and support my family in a different way from teaching. So I mean, I write articles as well, and I've written everything: lifestyle articles, travel articles, literary essays, whatever is demanded of me. And I think a lot of writers put together careers like that. I cannot imagine writing a book for a check. The pressure that it would put on, I wrote Sweet Bitter completely, I mean, up to here in debt, but like completely free from any sort of expectation, any deadline, any financial accountability. And so I've heard so many writers say it, whatever the day job is, keep it, because it will shut down your availability to radical and new ideas. If you're trying to make money through books, it's just, first of all, it's really hard to do. It's very rarely possible. And I can't imagine what it would do to your brain.
That's a really interesting point, actually, because I mean, it's a different, world, different level. But I've always kept a day job. I work at an art museum by day. That's my actual day. You came to the museum. I forgot.
Great
about
museum. Yep,
so
beautiful.
I've done that I do this as a hobby, right? But it's like a hugely encompassing, giant thing that takes a lot of time. And people ask me all the time why I never get paid to do this, or why I've never done this as my. And I always said if I did it that way, it would take it out of a passion and turn it into a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it would change the dynamic of it. It would change the way I feel about it, because I don't really do it for any benefit other than your soul, I guess, to not make it sound too cheesy, but it feeds me in a certain way to kind of have this kind of stuff happening all the time. And so I do understand that. And is that something that you think, even as you get more successful, you may not need to always do that, but you think you'll just always be juggling things to keep that balance in your life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's so important. I'm a partner in a wine store in Joshua Tree out in the Yucca Valley in California. I would work on the floor in the wine store. If no one would have me in television, I would work in restaurants again. I can't think about writing full time. I just think the pressures of making something commercial or palatable or making it profitable are at odds with art making a lot of the time. I mean, and even in your situation, if you were getting paid for doing this, you would be accountable to whoever was paying you to deliver something. Whereas right now you're free to imagine in any way, shape, or form you want. And that freedom is really vital to me.
I was wondering about the book. You're very kind of warts and all about yourself, and you're very critical of yourself. And I think that comes with hindsight, of course. I think we all look back, if we have some sense of humility in our life, that we can see mistakes we made and be honest about that. But at the same time, I think it is some ways impossible to be 100% honest about ourselves, because we're in ourselves. I wonder if someone had written this book about you, as opposed to you writing it about yourself, how they would have portrayed you differently, you think? Do you think there would be a difference?
I'm inclined to say, I mean, unless it's my ex-husband and or the monster in the book, I'm inclined to say I did have friends who said, but you're so funny, or but you're such a good friend, or you love to dance, or whatever the levity is in my life, whatever extroverted self I present, a self that is often in service, right? There is like a huge service component to my life that I don't write about. And I think they would be kinder. It's not just hindsight. I grew up in a family of verbally abusive, very loud, dramatic, and sometimes violent women. And those are the voices in my head. And so it's really hard to give myself credit at the appropriate places. It's hard to feel proud of anything I've done. It's hard to hold my accomplishments in balance with my flaws. This is so easy for me to write about. This is on it. Like, if you read my journal, it is meaner. And so I think I have thought, if someone else wrote this memoir and I featured in it, and then maybe someone else would write it and it would be meaner, right? And I'd be emotionally distant and narcissistic, and I definitely, being written about is terrifying, I think. I feel really badly for everyone involved in this book. It must be horrible.
We have a guest, Linda, asking, in an interview you discussed boundaries and therapy. Can you comment on the role that therapy has played in helping you?
Yeah, I have been with the same therapist for the past 11 years. But even before that, I was put, for panic attacks when I was quite little, I was put into therapy. That was right after my dad left. So that was like around kindergarten. And I was in therapy off and on. And I really believe in it as far as teaching me how to communicate feelings. When I look at the difference between my generation and my parents' generation, they don't know how to talk. They don't know how to be vulnerable.
Right.
They don't know how to problem solve in a non-escalating manner. And so while I hope not to be in therapy for the rest of my life, I credit it with giving me communication skills and also with learning how to be a storyteller. I think that the first level of therapy is the stories that we tell, and then you gain an awareness of that and you can see yourself doing it. And that has been immensely helpful to me as a writer.
I want to take a pause for a second and just remind people, if you don't have a copy of Stray yet, we have links here in the chat, so you can do that. We'll repost that several times to make sure you can pick up your copy of Stray, and might as well get one of these too while you're at it. It's a 2 for the price of 2 special just for tonight.
Sweet Bitter is so much more fun.
Yeah.
Rock and roll, sex and drugs, food.
What order would you go? This would be the after book, right? You go finish with this one probably, yeah? Start with this?
Yeah, that's Sweet Bitter's dessert.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Just that's the curated way we're gonna suggest you read these books. So I think it would be silly not to talk about the restaurant industry for a moment, which is in complete utter tailspin at the moment. When you wrote Sweet Bitter, obviously it's very much a love letter to the industry. Also kind of a not so love letter to parts of it, but you can tell that it's a passion. And I think you obviously were talking about that you'd still work in a restaurant. You still have this passion for that. And it kind of gets in your blood at a certain point and you can't really shake it. That'll be part of your personality probably for your whole life, really.
Yeah.
And you probably have so many friends and people that work in that industry. I mean, I don't know what the exact question is, but I mean, have you been in contact with some people and kind of, are they still trying to figure out what to do, or do you see any way out of this for the restaurants?
I see no way out of it.
Yeah.
Everyone is panicked. Everyone is taking it one day at a time. Everyone has pivoted to make necessary changes to keep their doors open. And I know quite a few people who haven't been able to and are just shut down. I am terrified for places like New York in particular, but Los Angeles, whose character is made up of small businesses still. I see no way forward. Half capacity doesn't work. Taking temperatures at the door doesn't work. The second people really reopen and people start getting sick, they will stop going to restaurants. That will be the first thing. What is shocking to me that I couldn't have imagined when I was writing Sweet Bitter is how expendable restaurants really are. I think that we, as consumers, we had kind of absorbed that this was a necessary part of life. I ate in restaurants multiple times a week, and even with a little child, and they're not necessary at all. They're a delight. They're like a pure indulgence, and there's something to be mourned and missed. But I think when you get into a life or death situation, there's no question. It's just such a loss.
The numbers, I was reading one poll that said they think up to maybe 85% of independent restaurants may not make it through this thing, which is just unbelievable. And of course, some will come back in different forms. David Chang has a great podcast about kind of what's been happening now, and he was talking to Jessica Coslow from Squirrel there in LA, and talking through some of those things. And people are transitioning into other to go and figuring out retail and things like that. But it's great. I mean, obviously, when you wrote this just a few years ago, even when you were here in 2017, who could have imagined that whole industry basically disappear in a month or two? It's just unbelievable, And I wonder too about the TV industry, right? Obviously, production everywhere has stopped. And people should know you're not just the writer of the show. You're what is called a showrunner, right? Are you the showrunner? Yeah.
Yeah, I was a co-showrunner on Sweet Bitter.
What does that mean for people that may not know?
So the showrunner hires all the writers for the writer's room. They proofread all of the scripts. They kind of direct the season. They're responsible to the network for a budget. They hire everyone. They're there through sound mixing, music, editing. You're there at every single step. And so I co-show ran Sweet Bitter with Stu Zickerman, who is my dear friend, and we still have projects together. And going forward, it's funny, I get job offers for show running, and I'm like, that job's crazy. Like, being a writer is one thing, an executive producer is another thing. Being a showrunner, being the one responsible to two entities, right? The art and the money behind the art is crazy to me. But again, it's a skill set.
But you also get the most control of anybody, right? Mm-hmm. So is that the appeal that, you had this product that is not just a novel, it very much was you in a way too. It's very personal. Was that one of the reasons why, you had never done that before, right? Like I said, when you were here, you had this big binder you were carrying around or something. It looked like a dictionary. I can't remember what it was, but you said you called it a Bible, I think. Was that the right terminology?
Yeah, the Bible is the entire season laid out. That's character arcs for every single character on the show. It's episode summaries. It's the world. It's all of the journeys, all of the jokes, all of the trouble that everyone's going to get into. And I think when you're a showrunner, when you are involved at the level that I was involved in, first of all, I don't recommend this to all authors. Like, everyone should decide their level of it, because you're not going to write while you're doing this. This is a 12-hour a day, many months job. Everyone who works in production has like a restaurant mentality, actually, where it's just like you clock into service, you work 14 hours, you don't complain if you burn yourself or cut yourself, you just keep going. And the rest of your life really stops. And in that way, it's really adrenalized and incredible. Also unhealthy, like the restaurant industry can be. But to work on a television show at all and then not see it all the way through, to not have say over what the title sequence is going to be or what music they're going to use, which becomes such a huge part of any show.
Right.
It's wanted,
right? The tone. It's almost like your novel has a tone, your show needs a tone, and you're the author of that tone, right?
Yep, absolutely. And so to go in halfway wasn't really an option for me. I was either going to go all the way and learn as much as possible, or I was going to just let someone else do it. And I chose to go all the way.
Yeah. We'll wrap. We're kind of getting toward the end here. So there's a few other things I wanted to touch base on. One being, we had a question that I think in a roundabout way was asking, how do you know when you've reached a point to write a memoir? And I guess I would kind of round that out by saying, why now? Like, why was Stray written now, as opposed to 5 years ago, as opposed to being your first book, or when you're 50 years old? Like, what was the thing that kind of told you now was the time to do it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think that our life stories are so ongoing, and I really tried to leave readers with that at the end of Stray, that it was a work in progress that shifts because my parents are still alive, because I'm still navigating boundaries with them all the time, that this story didn't have an ending. And a lot of memoirs that we read, conventional memoirs, end with a recovery from an illness or an addiction, a car crash, or an epiphany, some sort of grand healing after you've hiked the whole PCT. And I love Cheryl Strayed's Wild. I'm not being snarky about that at all, but that is what we're conditioned to expect from a memoir. And my book never had that.
There's no true resolution, right? There's not,
no,
it's observation.
There's a turn though. There's a character who goes on a journey and seems to turn a corner, in regards to a couple things she's doing to hurt herself, if I had to talk about it in the third person, which I'm way more comfortable doing. And so you'll know you're ready when the writing is the most urgent thing, right? When you look at it and you're like, this is the best writing I'm doing. This is a hot spot. I need to follow it. I can't write anything else. Everything else feels dead in comparison to it. And then, Jeff, your question, the why now of it, was when I had Julian, I felt so abandoned by my parents in not having anyone to share or reflect on parenthood with. I felt very alone and decided to write Stray quickly at a phase when a lot of women are just enjoying motherhood or trying to take a break or catch up. I decided I wanted to write a book instead. And for me, I think there was new compassion for them, which always happens. Even becoming a dog parent, I'm sure you have more compassion for your parents as people.
Sure.
Yeah, and how suffocating the responsibility can be, and how you don't stop being your old self necessarily, but you suppress it. You have to. That mixture of compassion and like the fresh feeling of sadness that they can't be with me propelled this book, that I was like, I'm going to write it. It's time.
Have you thought about, and forget if this is too personal, let me know, but have you thought about, when your kids are old enough or get to be old enough to even know what grandparents are and your parents are still alive, how to explain to them that they have these people out there that they don't have in their life, and why? Because how do you even tell a kid, they're not going to be reading Stray for a long time. So why will,
Never. They're never reading Stray. Yeah. Especially the girl is never reading this book.
At least you'll try. Yeah, we'll see. I think I would read it if I was them at some point, but maybe years and years and years and years and years from now. So
I read Mary Carr say that her son has never read her books. That's what I'm holding on to.
I wouldn't read her books if I was her kid either. So.
I do think about that all the time because I do not want to give my children this dark space and say, here are these two broken people that your mom comes from, and look at your dad's family. They're perfect. I mean, they are. My in-laws are wonderful and incredible grandparents. And that's part of the reason we still visit my mom. We visit her and she doesn't fully understand that she has a grandchild, but Julian will see her. He'll know that she had an accident. And I think I don't want to tell them how to feel about these people. If for some reason my father transforms into a different person and wants to be a grandfather, I'm like laughing, trying to get this out of my mouth. But if it happened, I would have to, I would be open-ish to it. I think you have to be.
I think a lot of times you'll see that where, people that have had really troubling or difficult relationships with their parents, they'll see sometimes that, they blossom as grandparents and they don't understand, like, how come you're treating these kids this way and you treated me, or weren't involved in my life at all. And it's probably a difficult moment to say, hey, it's good for the kid, right, to kind of let this happen, and I don't need to bring myself always into that relationship. It's got to be very complicated to think about.
I would love to see my grandparents were so important to me and raised me partially because my mom wasn't totally able to all the time, and I would be very open to see that. But yes,
grandparents are a big part of this book. That's a really interesting part of the book. Your aunt also is a fascinating person to me, and which we don't even have time to get into that. But I guess lastly, I would just be curious to know, we were talking just a minute ago about the idea that, a lot of books have this moment of revelation or whatever, but I do wonder what it felt like to just be done with this. It might be cliche, but was there catharsis to getting this out there in the world for you?
No. Writing about depression and anxiety and pain is very close to being depressed and anxious and in pain. And I cried every day of writing. I felt like I was betraying my newborn son because I was choosing to be in an office reading transcripts of an affair I had 5 years ago with someone who wasn't his father. I felt so guilty and so ashamed. And then I sent it in, and the reality that I was putting this out into the world hit me. And that was an entirely different level of shame. And then it's come out, and there has been so much gratification in readers finding it and people I admire reading it and being kind and generous about it. But I still have a dark feeling about the book. Yeah. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. There's been no celebration. Almost the fact that it came out during a pandemic just elevates that. Like, we ordered takeout the night it came out, but not yet. Yeah. Maybe someday.
And then lastly, and you just touched on this actually, I think one of the great things about reading a story about a very specific can become universal to so many people, and you'll read a book that's about someone else. It can be a novel, it could be a memoir, and you see things about yourself. And you kind of just touched on this, but I'm curious, you're probably hearing from a ton of people saying, I went through this is my relationship with my parents. And I have to imagine that even though it's very dark, it feels good to at least know you broaden someone's community, or that you've felt like, hey, I'm not alone in the world, and people out there go through these things, and getting that feedback must be nice.
Yeah, it's definitely, and to be honest, the kindness I've received on Stray has meant more to me than every person who's told me they loved Sweet Bitter. And I'm able to absorb it and hear, I mean, anyone was very moved by this book, I feel a kindredness with. And so there is an enlargement of community. And it's shocking to me how universal, or how someone can tell me their life story and I think it's so, and they're like, in your book, we have the exact same story. And I'm like, yours is horrible. Like, oh my God. But it's the feeling, I think, of abandonment.
Do you think that you'll be kind of bouncing back and forth through your career from fiction and nonfiction, or you think this will be kind of a blip and you're going to kind of stay on the novel track?
I will never write a memoir again. I would write nonfiction pieces. I'd love to write someday about the television industry, and maybe in my 60s write about Sweet Bitter, like what happened with that book. But I will not, like a full memoir. No, before the pandemic, I was working on a novel and I was so excited. I was like jumping out of my skin with excitement.
Well, we'll be excited to see whatever that ends up being. I want to remind people, pick up your copy of Stray. You can get that there in the links. You will not forget that experience. It really is a powerful, powerful read. And like we said before, finish it with the dessert that is Sweet Bitter. I can't thank you enough for doing this. I hope you have you're a few weeks away from baby number 2. So congratulations ahead of time. I hope that you have a lot of joy in your life coming up through this crazy pandemic time. You're certainly going to be busy. So great to see you, I think. Wish you the best. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I can't wait to be back in Tulsa. I'm serious about paperback. Spring is going to be here around the corner, and I would love to come see you guys.
Yeah, we'll do it. All right. Well, thank you all for watching. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.